The news about humanity's victory against the Skull Raiders spread through council space like wildfire. In alien bars and meeting halls across the galaxy, beings talked about the strange humans who had done the impossible. Most aliens were confused, and some were angry. How had these primitive creatures succeeded where advanced civilizations had failed for years? Dr. Kim Nara stood in the research laboratory on Omega Station 7. This was one of the most important science facilities in the galaxy. Here, the brightest minds from dozens of different species worked together to solve the universe's greatest mysteries. At least that was what they were supposed to do. Dr. Kim Nara had been assigned to work with the alien scientists as part of humanity. Year-long trial. She was excited to learn from beings who had been studying the stars for thousands of years. But after 3 weeks at the station, she was beginning to understand why the Council had really sent her here. The aliens did not want to work with her. They barely spoke to her except to remind her how primitive human science was compared to their own. They gave her the most boring tasks like organizing data files and cleaning equipment. They acted like she was a child who might break something important if left alone. Dr. Clicks was the worst of them all. He was a Zephyrian, which meant he looked like a giant octopus with blue skin and tentacles instead of arms. He was the head of the quantum physics department, and he never missed a chance to make Dr. Kim Nara feel stupid and unwelcome. "Human," he said one morning as his tentacles waved in the air. "Your species has not even learned to transfer consciousness between bodies. How can you possibly understand real science?" Dr. Kim Nara had heard this kind of insult many times before. The aliens loved to point out all the things that humans could not do. They had machines that could think faster than any human brain. They had weapons that could destroy entire planets. They had ships that could travel across the galaxy in days instead of months. But Dr. Kim Nara had been watching the alien scientists work, and she had noticed something very interesting. For all their advanced technology and superior knowledge, they had a serious problem. They had become completely dependent on their machines to do their thinking for them. When the aliens faced a difficult question, they would feed all the information into their supercomputers and wait for the answer. When they needed to solve a problem, they would connect their minds to artificial intelligence systems that would tell them what to do. They had stopped thinking for themselves. Humans were different. They asked questions about everything. They looked at problems from many different angles. They talked to people who might have useful information even if those people were not considered experts. This difference became very important. When the research team faced a crisis that threatened to destroy the entire station, the scientists had been working on a project to create stable wormholes that could be used for instant travel between star systems. It was incredibly dangerous work that required perfect precision, but something had gone wrong. The wormhole generator was creating unstable energy fields that were growing stronger every day. If they could not fix the problem soon, the entire station would be torn apart by the expanding space time distortions. Dr. Clicks and his team worked frantically to solve the crisis. They ran thousands of computer simulations. They analyzed every piece of data they had collected. They consulted with the most advanced artificial intelligence systems in the galaxy. But nothing worked. The instability continued to grow. "This is impossible," Dr. Clicks said as his tentacles thrashed with frustration. "Our calculations show that the wormhole generator should be working perfectly. There must be some unknown factor that our computers cannot detect." The other alien scientists agreed. They had checked and rechecked every system. They had tested every component. Everything appeared to be functioning exactly as designed. But the dangerous energy fields continued to expand. Dr. Kim Nara had been watching from the corner of the laboratory. She was not allowed to touch any of the important equipment, but she had been observing everything carefully. While the aliens focused on their computers and data, she had been paying attention to other things. She had noticed that the maintenance workers seemed nervous when they cleaned near the wormhole generator. She had seen transport pilots change their routes to avoid flying close to the laboratory. She had even talked to the alien janitors who mentioned feeling strange vibrations in the walls. Dr. Clicks, she said quietly. May I make a suggestion? Zephyrian turned his blue eyes toward her and his tentacles moved in a pattern that meant annoyance. What could you possibly suggest that our advanced computers have not already considered? Have you asked the maintenance staff about what they have noticed? Dr. Kim Nara said. Sometimes the people who work closest to the equipment notice things that sensors cannot detect. Dr. Click's tentacles waved dismissively. Maintenance workers are not scientists. They do not understand quantum physics. Why would we ask them about technical problems? But Dr. Kim Nara was not discouraged. She had learned to trust human instincts even when they seemed to contradict scientific data. She spent the next 2 days talking to every person who worked near the wormhole generator. She asked the janitors about unusual sounds. She questioned the security guards about strange energy readings. She even interviewed the food service workers who delivered meals to the laboratory. Most of the aliens thought she was wasting time. But slowly she began to piece together a picture that the advanced computers had missed. Several workers mentioned feeling vibrations that seemed to come from inside the walls. Others reported seeing tiny flashes of light that appeared and disappeared too quickly for the sensors to record. Dr. Kim Nara realized that the problem was not with the wormhole generator itself. Something was interfering with the energy fields from outside the laboratory. She began to search the areas around the generator looking for anything that might be causing the disturbances. Finally, she found it. Deep inside the station walls there were tiny crystalline growths that had formed over many years. They were so small that the advanced sensors could not detect them. But they were absorbing and redirecting the wormhole energy in ways that made the system unstable. The solution was embarrassingly simple. The crystals had to be removed from the walls around the generator. It was basic maintenance work that could be done by any skilled technician, but it required someone to think about the problem differently than the computers had been programmed to think. When Dr. Kim Nara explained her discovery to Dr. Clicks and the other scientists, they were amazed. The crystalline growths were exactly the kind of unknown factor that their computers had been unable to identify. Within hours, the crystals were removed and the dangerous energy fields began to stabilize. The crisis was over, but the alien scientists were not happy about being saved by a human. They insisted that Dr. Kim Nara had simply been lucky. They refused to admit that the human approach to problem solving might actually be better than their own methods, but word of what had happened spread through the station anyway. Other researchers began to ask Dr. Kim Nara for her opinions on difficult problems. They started to realize that sometimes the most advanced solution was not necessarily the best solution. Dr. Kim Nara continued her work on the station, but now she had a new understanding of why the Council had really brought humans into the galaxy. The aliens had become so advanced that they had forgotten how to think like living beings. They needed humanity to remind them of skills they had lost. The test was far from over, but Dr. Kim Nara was beginning to believe that humans might have something important to offer the galaxy after all. Sometimes the most primitive approach was actually the most sophisticated one. 6 months into humanity trial period, a terrible threat emerged from the dark spaces between galaxies. Ancient beings called the Devourers had awakened from their long sleep and were moving toward Council space. These creatures were older than any known civilization, and they had only one purpose. They consumed entire star systems, leaving nothing but empty void behind them. The first reports came from the outer colonies. Entire planets had simply vanished along with their stars and everything else in those solar systems. The few ships that escaped described beings made of pure energy that could absorb any attack and grow stronger from it. Emergency meetings were called on every Council world. The greatest military leaders gathered to plan a defense against this ancient threat. They assembled the largest fleet in galactic history. Thousands of ships from dozens of different species all working together to protect their homes. Ambassador Li Yuan sat in the council chamber and watched the alien leaders argue about strategy. She had been invited to observe but not to participate. The aliens still considered humans too primitive to contribute to serious military planning. Chancellor, Vex stood at the center of the chamber surrounded by holographic displays showing the approaching Devourer fleet. His 6 eyes moved constantly as he studied the tactical information. His 4 arms gestured as he spoke to the assembled commanders. "We have faced many threats before," he said in his grinding metal voice. "Our technology has always been sufficient to protect the galaxy. These Devourers may be ancient, but they cannot stand against our combined might," Admiral Vex of the Crystalline Fleet agreed. Her body chimed like musical bells as she spoke. "Our energy weapons are the most powerful in the galaxy. Even beings of pure energy must have some weakness we can exploit." Commander Zol of the Reptilian Defense Force hissed his agreement. "Our ships are faster and more maneuverable than anything these ancient creatures have seen. We will surround them and destroy them before they can reach our core systems." The alien leaders were confident in their superior technology and advanced tactics. They had never faced an enemy they could not defeat with their powerful weapons and sophisticated strategies, but Li Jiwan had been studying the reports more carefully than the aliens realized. She had noticed patterns in the Devourer attacks that the Council leaders had missed. The energy beings did not just absorb weapons. Fire, they actually became stronger with each attack. The combined fleet launched with great ceremony. Every species contributed their best ships and most experienced crews. The humans were allowed to send a small squadron led by Commander Yang Taiho, but they were placed at the back of the formation where they would be safe from the real fighting. Yang Taiho watched from the Bridge of the Determination as thousands of alien ships moved through space toward the approaching Devourers. He had seen the same reports as Ambassador Li Jiwan, and he was worried about what would happen when the two forces met. The battle began 3 days later near the edge of Council space. The alien fleet opened fire with everything they had. Energy. Beams that could melt planets struck the Devourers. Missiles that could destroy entire cities exploded against their energy forms. The combined firepower was incredible to watch, but something terrible happened. Instead of being damaged by the attacks, the Devourers began to grow larger and brighter. They absorbed every energy weapon that hit them and used that power to become stronger. The alien fleet was actually feeding their enemies within minutes. The largest Devourer had grown to the size of a small moon. Its energy form pulsed with stolen power as it began to fight back. When it attacked, the alien ships simply ceased to exist. They were not destroyed or damaged. They were completely consumed, leaving not even debris behind. The alien commanders were horrified. Their most powerful weapons were useless against these ancient beings. Worse than useless, because every attack made the Devourers stronger. "All ships retreat," Admiral Vex commanded as her crystalline voice cracked with fear. "We cannot fight enemies that grow stronger from our attacks," but the Devourers were faster than the fleeing ships. They consumed entire squadrons in seconds. The proud alien fleet was being destroyed by an enemy they could not even hurt. Commander Yang Taeho made a decision that would change the course of the battle. Instead of retreating with the other ships, he ordered his small human squadron to move closer to the Devourers. "Sir," Lieutenant Choi Sumi said from her sensor station, "the alien fleet is in full retreat." "Should we not follow them?" "No," Yang Taiho replied. "We need to buy them time to regroup. All ships prepare for close range combat." The human ships were tiny compared to the massive Devourers. But Yang Taiho had noticed something that the alien commanders had missed. The energy beings moved in predictable patterns. They had grown so powerful that they had become overconfident. "All ships fire kinetic weapons only," Yang Taiho ordered. "No energy weapons of any kind." The human ships opened fire with old-fashioned projectile weapons. Metal slugs and explosive shells struck the Devourers with tremendous force. For the first time in the battle, the ancient beings showed signs of confusion. The kinetic weapons could not be absorbed like energy blasts. They were physical matter, moving at incredible speeds. The Devourers had no way to convert them into usable power, but the human squadron was too small to do serious damage. They could only slow the Devourers down while the alien fleet escaped. Yang Taeho knew that his ships would eventually be overwhelmed, Back on the council station, Ambassador Li Jiwan was watching the battle through long-range sensors. She could see the alien fleet in full retreat while the tiny, human squadron fought alone. Against impossible odds, she stood up in the council chamber and spoke in a voice that carried across the huge room. "Chancellor Vex, you need to listen to. May, your energy weapons are making the Devourers stronger. We need to change our entire approach to this battle." The alien leaders turned to stare at her. Some of them made sounds of anger and disbelief. How dare this primitive human tell them how to fight? But Chancellor Vex was desperate. His proud fleets were being destroyed and his people were facing extinction. For the first time since humanity had arrived, he was willing to listen to what they had to say. "What do you propose?" he asked. "Physical weapons," Li Jiwan said. "Kinetic projectiles, chemical explosives, even nuclear weapons if necessary. The Devourers can absorb energy, but they cannot absorb matter." "Those are primitive weapons," protested Admiral Vex. "We abandoned such crude technology thousands of years ago. Sometimes the oldest solutions are the best ones," Li Jiwan replied. The council leaders looked at each other in silence. They had spent so long developing advanced technology that they had forgotten about simpler methods. But they were watching their fleets be destroyed by an enemy that their sophisticated weapons could not touch. Finally, Chancellor Vex spoke. "What do you need from us?" "Production facilities," Li Jiwan said. "Raw materials. And time to modify your ships to carry physical weapons instead of energy ones." It was a desperate plan, but it was the only hope the galaxy had. The proud alien species would have to abandon their advanced technology and fight like primitives. They would have to trust the humans to show them how to use weapons they had considered obsolete. Within hours, every shipyard in council space was working frantically to convert energy weapons to kinetic ones. Human engineers worked alongside alien technicians to install projectile launchers and explosive devices on ships that had never carried such primitive armaments. The Devourers continued to advance toward the core systems, consuming everything in their path. They had grown so large that they could devour entire fleets in minutes. But they had no idea that their enemies were preparing to fight them with weapons they had never encountered before. Ambassador Li Jiwan stood on the bridge of the modified council flagship and watched the converted fleet prepare for battle. Beside her stood Chancellor Vex and the other alien leaders. For the first time since humanity had arrived, they were working together as equals. The fate of the galaxy depended on whether primitive weapons could succeed where advanced technology had failed. The humans had forced the council to remember that sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective ones. The real battle was about to begin. 3 months had passed since the council gave humanity their impossible challenge. The aliens had not wasted any time in making things difficult for the humans. They assigned Earth ships to patrol the outer rim, which was the most dangerous part of the galaxy. This was where space pirates and raiders attacked peaceful merchant ships. It was where criminals and outlaws hid from the law. The council members thought this was very funny. They had sent their own powerful fleets to fight the criminals in the outer rim many times. Even with their advanced weapons and shields, they had failed to stop the attacks. How could primitive humans succeed where they had failed? Commander Yang Taiho sat in the captain chair of the Earth ship called Determination. The ship was much smaller than the alien vessels, but it was built by human hands with human ideas. Every system had been designed to work even when other systems failed. Every crew member had been trained to think for themselves instead of just following computer orders. Young Taiho was a quiet man who had grown up on Mars colony. He had learned to pilot ships in the dangerous asteroid fields around Jupiter. He knew how to make quick decisions when lives were at stake. His crew of 50 humans trusted him completely because he had saved their lives. Many times before, the ship moved slowly through a field of floating rocks and metal debris. This was where the notorious Skull Raiders liked to hide and attack passing ships. The Skull Raiders were some of the most feared criminals in the galaxy. They had been attacking merchant vessels for over 10 years and no one had been able to stop them. Lieutenant Choi Sumi worked at the sensor station. She was a young woman who had the best hearing and eyesight of anyone Yang Taiho had ever met. She could spot enemy ships before the computers even detected them. Her fingers moved quickly over the control panels as she searched for any sign of danger. "Sir," she said suddenly, "I am picking up emergency signals from a merchant ship. It sounds like they are under attack." Yang Taiho leaned forward in his chair. "How many enemy ships?" "At least 6 raider vessels, sir. They have surrounded a Centauri freighter and are demanding that the crew surrender their cargo." The other crew members looked at their commander. Everyone knew that 6 raider ships would be almost impossible to defeat. The Council species had tried to stop the Skull Raiders many times with ships that were bigger and more powerful than the Determination. They had always failed, but Yang Taiho had not come all this way to give up at the first sign of trouble. He had studied the reports of previous battles with the Raiders. He had noticed something that the alien commanders had missed. The Raiders were very good at fighting single large ships, but they had never faced human tactics before. "All crew members to battle stations," Yang Taiho announced over the ship communication system. "We are going to show these criminals what Earth children can do." The crew moved with practiced efficiency. Every person knew exactly what to do and where to go. There was no panic or confusion. Humans had learned to work together during centuries of wars and disasters on Earth. They knew how to stay calm under pressure. The Determination dropped out of faster than light traveled directly into the middle of the battle. The 6 raider ships were arranged in a circle around the damaged freighter. They were taking turns firing at the merchant vessel while staying far enough apart that the freighter could not fight back effectively. The sudden appearance of the human ship surprised the raiders. They had not expected anyone to come to the freighter rescue. Most Council species would have called for backup and waited for a larger fleet to arrive. But humans did not have time for such careful planning. The raider ships immediately turned their weapons toward the Determination. Energy bolts and missile strikes hit the human vessel from all directions. The ship shook and several control panels exploded in showers of sparks, but Yang Taiho had expected this. Instead of trying to fight all 6 ships at once like the alien commanders had done, he gave orders that confused the raiders completely. "Choi Sumi, take us directly toward the lead raider ship at maximum speed," he commanded. Park Jun-ho, prepare to fire all weapons at close range. The weapons officer Park Jun-ho was a man who had learned to shoot. By hunting wild animals in the forests of Korea, he understood that sometimes the best way to hit a target was to get as close as possible instead of fighting from a distance. The Determination rushed straight at the largest raider ship. The criminals fired everything they had at the approaching human vessel, but Yang Taiho ordered his pilot to change direction every few seconds. The ship twisted and turned through space like a bird avoiding a predator. The raiders had never seen anything like this. Their advanced computers could not predict where the human ship would go next because the humans were not following any logical pattern. They were using instinct and creativity instead of programmed responses. When the Determination got close enough, Park Jun-ho opened fire with every weapon the ship had. The raider vessel exploded in a ball of fire and metal fragments. The other raiders were so shocked that they stopped firing for several seconds. Yang Taiho did not waste this opportunity. "Choi Sumi, target the raider ship that is closest to the freighter. We need to give the merchant vessel room to escape." But as the human ship changed course again, one of the raider vessels scored a direct hit on the Determination sensor array. Sparks flew from Choi Sumi control panel and smoke filled the bridge. "Sensors are down, sir," she reported. "I cannot track the enemy ships anymore. Any other crew would have been in serious trouble. Without sensors, a ship was almost blind in space." Combat. But Choi Sumi had been trained by humans, not by computers. She quickly began rerouting power from other systems to create a makeshift sensor network. "Sir, I am using the communication array and the navigation system together," she said as her fingers flew over the controls. "It is not perfect, but I can track the raiders' movements." Meanwhile, Park Jun-ho weapons computer had been damaged by the enemy fire. The targeting system showed nothing but error messages. Most alien crews would have been helpless without their advanced computers to aim their weapons, but Park Junhe had learned to shoot before he ever saw a computer. He switched to manual control and began firing at the raider ships using only his eyes and his experience. His shots were more accurate than the computer had ever been. Within minutes, 2 more raider ships had been destroyed. The remaining 3 raiders realized that they were fighting an enemy unlike any they had faced before. These humans did not rely on technology alone. They used their minds and their instincts in ways that the raiders could not predict or counter. The surviving raiders turned and fled at maximum speed. They had never retreated from a battle before, but they had never fought humans before either. The crew of the Centauri freighter sent grateful messages to the determination. They could not believe that the humans had succeeded where so many others had failed. The freighter captain said that he would tell everyone in the galaxy about the brave humans who had saved his ship and crew, but Yang Taiho knew that this was only the beginning. The Council had given humanity 1 year to prove themselves. They had won their first battle, but there would be many more tests ahead. As the determination began repairs and headed back to the nearest space station, Yang Taiho looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Council members were probably hearing about this victory. They would be surprised and maybe a little worried. The humans had done something that was supposed to be impossible. They had defeated the Skull Raiders using inferior technology and a smaller ship. They had succeeded because they fought like humans, not like aliens. The real test was just beginning. The huge doors of the Galactic Council chamber opened with a deep rumbling sound that made the walls shake. Ambassador Li Jiwan walked through the entrance with her small team of humans behind her. Her simple blue uniform looked very plain compared to the amazing clothes and strange bodysuits worn by the alien beings inside the massive room. The chamber was so big that it could hold 1,000 people easily. The ceiling stretched high above them like a giant dome covered in moving lights that showed pictures of distant stars and planets. Around the curved walls sat hundreds of different alien species. Some looked like giant lizards with scales that changed colors. Others were made of what seemed like living crystal that made musical sounds when they moved. There were floating balls of light that pulsed with different colors and creatures that looked like walking trees with many arms. Li Jiwan had trained for years to be ready for this moment. She had studied every known alien language and custom. She knew which species liked to be greeted with a bow and which ones preferred a simple nod. But nothing had prepared her for the feeling of being so small and out of place in this room, full of beings who had traveled between the stars for thousands of years. Captain Park Minho walked beside her. He was a tall man with kind eyes, but his face was serious now. He had commanded Earth spaceships for 10 years and had fought in many battles to protect human colonies. But he had never seen anything like the advanced weapons and technology that surrounded them in this chamber. Behind them walked Dr. Kim Nara. She carried a small device that held all of Earth's greatest scientific discoveries. She had spent her whole life studying physics and engineering. She had helped design the faster-than-light engines that finally allowed humans to travel to other star systems. But looking at the alien technology around her, she felt like a child trying to understand adult things. The 3 humans walked slowly toward the center of the chamber. Every step they took echoed in the huge space. Hundreds of alien eyes watched them move. Some of the creatures made sounds that the humans' translation devices told them meant laughter. Others made noises that sounded like whispers and murmurs. At the far end of the chamber sat the most important member of the council. Chancellor Vex was a creature unlike anything humans had ever seen. He had 6 eyes arranged in a circle around his head. His skin was dark purple and covered in small spikes. He had 4 arms that ended in sharp claws, and when he spoke his voice sounded like grinding metal. Chancellor Vex leaned forward on his throne made of some kind of black stone that seemed to absorb light. His 6 eyes all focused on the 3 humans as they approached. When he spoke, his voice filled the entire chamber and made the air vibrate. "So these are the humans," he said, and his voice carried a tone that made it clear he was not impressed. "The species that thinks it deserves a place among the great civilizations of the Galaxy, the alien beings around the chamber began to make more sounds. The crystal creatures chimed like broken glass. The lizard people hissed and clicked their tongues. The floating lights pulsed brighter and faster. All of these sounds meant the same thing. They were laughing at the humans. Li Jiwan stopped in front of Chancellor Vex's throne and bowed slightly. She had practiced this moment many times, but her heart was beating fast. She knew that the next few minutes would decide the future of all humanity. "Great Chancellor," she said in a clear voice that carried across the chamber, "we come before this council to request membership. Earth has much to offer the galaxy. We have new ideas and fresh ways of solving problems. We have courage and determination. We ask only for the chance to prove ourselves." Chancellor Vex's 6 eyes blinked slowly. Then he began to laugh. It was a terrible sound, like metal scraping against stone. Soon other aliens joined in. The chamber filled with the sounds of hundreds of different species, all laughing at the same time. "Prove yourselves," Chancellor Vex repeated when the laughter died down. "What exactly do you think you can prove, little humans? Your species has barely left its own solar system. You still fight wars among yourselves? Your technology is so primitive that our children could build better tools with their toys." A creature that looked like a giant spider with wings spoke up from one of the side platforms. "Their ships are so slow, it takes them months to travel between star systems. Our ships can cross the galaxy in days." Another alien that seemed to be made of living metal added, "Their weapons use chemical explosives and metal bullets. We have weapons that can destroy entire planets with a single shot. Their lifespans are laughably short," said a being that looked like a walking tree. "They live for less than 100 years. How can they understand anything about the universe?" In such a brief time, the insults continued for several minutes. Each alien species seemed eager to point out how inferior humans were. They talked about human weaknesses like they were obvious facts that everyone should know. Li Jiwan felt her face grow hot with anger, but she kept her expression calm. Beside her, Captain Park Minho hands formed fists, but he also remained still. Dr. Kim Nera looked down at her device full of human achievements and wondered if any of it would matter to these advanced beings. Chancellor Vex raised one of his 4 arms and the chamber became quiet again. "Let me explain something to you humans," he said in a voice that sounded bored. "This council has existed for 50,000 years. We have seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations. We have explored every corner of the galaxy. We have solved problems that would break your minds to even think about." He pointed one sharp claw at Li Jiwan. "Your species has nothing to offer us. You have no advanced technology. You have no unique knowledge. You have no special abilities. You are simply another primitive species that has learned to build crude spaceships." The chamber erupted in agreement. Aliens made sounds of approval in hundreds of different languages. The crystal beings rang like bells. The floating lights pulsed in rhythm. The lizard people hissed and clicked, but Li Jiwan had not traveled across the galaxy to give up easily. She stepped forward and spoke in a voice that was stronger than before. "Great Chancellor and members of the Council," she said, "you judge us by your own standards. You say we are primitive because our technology is different from yours. But perhaps being different is exactly what the galaxy needs." This caused even more laughter. Chancellor Vex's eyes narrowed and his voice became colder. "Different," he said. "You think being weak and slow and short-lived makes you different in a good way. This council has no use for weakness. We need strength. We need advanced technology. We need beings who can contribute to the greatness of galactic civilization." He leaned back on his throne and looked at the humans like they were insects that had wandered into his home. "However," he continued, and his voice took on a tone that sounded almost amused, "the council believes in fairness. We will give you exactly what you ask for. A chance to prove yourselves." The chamber became very quiet. Even the background humming of the advanced technology seemed to stop. "You have 1 year," Chancellor Vex announced. 1 year to show this council that humanity deserves a place among the stars. You will be given tasks that test your abilities. You will be judged by the same standards we use for all species. His 6 eyes gleamed as he delivered what he clearly thought was the final blow. But when you fail, as you surely will, humanity will be forbidden from council space forever. You will return to your little planet and never again be allowed to travel beyond your own solar system. Do you accept these terms? Li Jiwan looked at her 2 companions. Captain Park Minho nodded slightly. Dr. Kemnara gave a small smile. They had expected this. Earth leaders had prepared them for exactly this situation. We accept, Li Jiwan said clearly. The chamber exploded with sounds of alien amusement. They had just witnessed what they thought was the end of human expansion into the galaxy. In 1 year, these primitive beings would be sent home in shame, and the galaxy would be rid of their annoying presence. But as the 3 humans turned to leave the chamber, Li Jiwan allowed herself a small smile. The aliens had made one crucial mistake. They had judged humanity by their own standards and found them lacking, but they had never asked what human standards might be. The real test was about to begin. The modified Council fleet approached the Devourer swarm with weapons that had not been used in galactic warfare for thousands of years. Every ship now carried kinetic projectiles instead of energy beams. Nuclear warheads replaced quantum torpedoes. Chemical explosives took the place of plasma charges. Commander Yang Taiho stood on the bridge of the flagship beside Chancellor Vex and the other alien leaders. His small squadron of human ships had been integrated into the main fleet. For the first time since arriving in Council space, humans were being treated as equal partners instead of primitive observers. Remember, Yang Taiho said to the combined fleet through the communication system, "These beings feed on energy. We are going to give them something they have never tasted before. Something they cannot digest," or the Devourers had grown massive during their advance through Council space. The largest ones were now the size of small planets. They pulsed with stolen energy from the thousands of ships they had consumed. They moved through space like living storms of pure power, but they had also become overconfident. They had faced no real resistance since awakening from their ancient sleep. Every enemy they encountered had used energy weapons that only made them stronger. They expected this battle to be like all the others. "All ships prepare for kinetic bombardment," Yang Taiho ordered. "Target the largest devourer first. We need to show them that we are different from their previous enemies." The fleet opened fire with a sound like thunder rolling across the galaxy. Millions of metal projectiles struck the energy being at incredible speeds. The devourer tried to absorb the attack as it had done so many times before, but something was wrong. The kinetic weapons hit like physical hammers against the creature energy form. Instead of being converted into usable power, the metal slugs disrupted the patterns that held the being together. For the first time in millions of years, a devourer showed signs of actual damage. The ancient creature let out a sound that was felt rather than heard. It was a scream of confusion and pain that echoed through space. The other devourers stopped their advance and turned toward the source of their companion distress. "It worked," Admiral Vex said with amazement in her crystal voice. "The primitive weapons are actually hurting them," but Yang Taiho knew that kinetic weapons alone would not be enough. The devourers were ancient and powerful. They would adapt to this new threat just as they had adapted to countless others over the ages. "Dr. Kemnara," he said into his communicator. "Are you ready with the special weapons?" Dr. Kemnara's voice came back from the research vessel that had been modified to carry her experimental devices. "Ready, sir. But I must warn you that we have never tested these weapons on living targets. We do not know what will happen." During the desperate weeks of preparation, Dr. Kemnara had been working on something that combined human ideas with alien technology. She had studied the reports of devourer attacks and noticed that the energy beings had one weakness that no one had thought to exploit. The devourers existed as pure energy, but they still had to obey certain laws of physics. They could not exist in areas where space and time were severely distorted. Dr. Kemnara had designed weapons that created localized gravity wells strong enough to compress their energy forms into matter. "Fire the gravity weapons," Yang Taiho ordered. Strange. Devices mounted on the human research vessel began to hum with power. They created invisible fields that bent space and time around the largest devourer. The ancient being suddenly found itself being compressed by forces it could not absorb or redirect. The energy creature began to change. Its glowing form became denser and more solid. For the first time in its existence, it was experiencing what it meant to have physical substance. It was becoming matter instead of energy. The other devourers watched in horror as their companion was transformed. They had never seen anything like this happen before. They began to attack the human research vessel with desperate fury, but the combined fleet was ready for them. Ship after ship fired kinetic weapons at the advancing energy beings. Nuclear warheads exploded in brilliant flashes that disrupted their forms. Chemical explosives created shock waves that scattered their energy patterns. The battle raged for hours. The devourers fought with the desperation of beings who had suddenly discovered they were not invincible. They had consumed entire galaxies over the ages, but they had never faced enemies who understood their true nature. Slowly the tide began to turn. The gravity weapons compressed more devourers into physical form. The kinetic bombardment damaged their energy matrices. The nuclear explosions created chaos in their ranks. Chancellor Vex watched the battle with all six of his eyes. He had commanded fleets for hundreds of years, but he had never seen anything like this. The humans had not only saved the galaxy, but they had done it by teaching the council species to think in ways they had forgotten. "How did you know?" he asked Yang Taiho. "How did you know that physical weapons would work when our energy weapons failed?" Yang Taiho smiled for the first time since the crisis began. "Because humans have always had to fight with whatever tools we could find. We learned long ago that the most advanced weapon is not always the most effective one." The battle continued, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The devourers were being systematically defeated by weapons they had never encountered before. Some were destroyed by the kinetic bombardment. Others were transformed by the gravity weapons into forms they could not escape, but the most important, victory was not military. It was the moment when the council species realized that they had been wrong about humanity. These primitive beings had not only equaled their betters, but had surpassed them in the most crucial way. They had kept the wisdom that the advanced species had lost. As the last devourer was either destroyed or transformed, the combined fleet began to cheer. Thousands of different voices from dozens of species all celebrating together. For the first time in galactic history, humans and aliens had fought as true equals. Dr. Kim Nara reported from her research vessel that the transformed devourers were not dead but had been changed into a new kind of existence. They were no longer driven by the need to consume everything around them. They had become something entirely different. "What will happen to them now?" Ambassador Li Jiwan asked. "They will have to learn to live as physical beings," Dr. Kim Nara replied. "They will have to discover what it means to exist in a universe where they are not the most powerful creatures." The battle was over, but the real victory was just beginning. The council species had learned that advancement was not just about technology or power. It was about wisdom and the ability to see solutions that others missed. They had mocked humanity for being primitive, but in the end it was those primitive qualities that had saved them all. The galaxy would never be the same again. 1 year had passed since humanity first walked into the council chamber and faced the mockery of the galaxy's greatest civilizations. The same chamber looked very different now. Where once only alien architecture had dominated the space, there were now human touches everywhere. Simple functional designs that emphasized purpose over decoration. Clean lines that spoke of efficiency rather than grandeur. Ambassador Li Jiwan sat at the council table not as a supplicant begging for acceptance, but as an equal partner in galactic governance. Her simple blue uniform no longer looked plain among the elaborate alien garments. Instead, it represented something that the galaxy had been missing for too long. The practical wisdom of beings who had learned to solve problems with whatever tools they had. Chancellor Vex stood before the assembled council members. His 6 eyes no longer held the arrogance and dismissal that had marked humanity's first appearance. Instead, there was something that had been absent from the chamber for centuries. Genuine respect for beings who saw the universe differently. We gathered today not to judge humanity, he said in his grinding metal voice, but to acknowledge a debt that can never be fully repaid. We who considered ourselves the most advanced beings in the galaxy had forgotten the most important lesson of, that wisdom does not come from technology alone. The alien representatives made sounds of agreement in dozens of different languages. The crystal beings chimed in harmonious tones. The reptilian delegates hissed their approval. The floating lights pulsed in synchronized patterns. But these were not the mocking sounds that had greeted humanity's arrival. These were sounds of genuine respect and gratitude. We judged you by our own standards, Chancellor Vex continued. We found you lacking because you did not possess our advanced weapons or our sophisticated technology. We failed to see that our standards themselves were flawed. Dr. Kim Nara sat in the section reserved for the Council scientific advisors. Around her were the same alien researchers who had once treated her like a primitive child. Now they asked for her opinions on the most important projects. They had learned that sometimes the most sophisticated approach was to ask simple questions that everyone else had overlooked. The joint research facility that Dr. Kim Nara had helped to establish was producing discoveries that no single species could have achieved alone. Human curiosity combined with alien knowledge was unlocking secrets of the universe that had puzzled scientists for millennia. Dr. Clicks, the Zephyrian researcher who had once dismissed human science as worthless, now worked closely with Dr. Kim Nara on projects that required both advanced technology and creative thinking. His tentacles moved in patterns that humans had learned meant deep respect as he spoke about their latest breakthrough. The human approach to problem solving has changed everything, he said to the assembled scientists. We had become so dependent on our computers that we forgot how to think for ourselves. Dr. Kim Nara has taught us that the most important tool is not the most advanced one, but the one that asks the right questions. Commander Yang Taiho now led the Council Combined Defense Forces. His small squadron of human ships had grown into a fleet that included vessels from every member species. But more important than the ships was the new approach to military thinking that humans had brought to the galaxy. The alien commanders had learned that advanced weapons were useless if they could not be adapted to unexpected threats. Human tactical flexibility was now taught in every military academy. The lesson was simple but profound. Sometimes the oldest solutions were the most effective ones. The transformation of the Devourers had become the most studied phenomenon in galactic history. The ancient energy beings were slowly adapting to their new existence as physical creatures. They were learning to live in a universe where they were not the most powerful entities. Some had even begun to work with the Council species to explore the furthest reaches of space. The Devourers were not evil, explained Dr. Kim Nara to a gathering of philosophers and scientists.